India is an adventurous paradise. You head out for a holiday, which quickly turns into a survival situation. A dream turns into a nightmare.
I'm thirsty, I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I'm lost.
Shelter, water, and food become a priority. A fire to keep you warm. But how? I'm Chandan Lahiri from OTS Survival School. I'll give you some tips and show you some tricks to use in a self-reliant situation. Do not think problems can only happen to other people. It can happen to you. When in the wilderness, you're bound to get injured. And many of these injuries might be bleeding, open wounds. Bleeding can be from three sources: veins, arteries, and capillaries. Bleeding from veins and capillaries are easier to contain. Arterial bleeding is much more difficult. But if you know the kind of bleeding from the form and structure of the wound that you see, if you can recognize the kind of wound that is, you'll be able to treat that wound much better. So it's important to know, looking at a bleeding wound, what kind of a bleeding wound it is. Take a look. Open wounds are not good, particularly open wounds that are bleeding, and more so out in the wilderness. You need to be able to recognize a bleeding wound, and you'll be able to do that by looking at the size, form, thickness, structure, amount of blood loss. There are essentially 5 kinds of bleeding wounds. You know what they are? They're incisions, lacerations, punctures, avulsions, and abrasions. Incisions are clean wounds, almost neat looking. They're straight, and you'll recognize an incision when you have a cut. For instance, you have a cut here, and they've got straight edges. So if you pinch the edges together, if I've got a cut here and I pinch the edges together, they'll fit almost exactly, like so. And if it does that, you'll know that you have a wound, which is an incision. Lacerations are more angry looking. They're not straight like an incision. They have jagged edges. It's almost like a tear. And if a branch goes in and then the skin gets pulled out, if you can imagine that situation, that's what a laceration would look like. And it also tends to bleed a lot more than incisionary wounds. When a sharp, pointy object enters your skin, you get a puncture wound. And because the entry wound is so small, it looks very benign. But what can actually happen in a puncture wound, if the puncture is deep enough, it can affect tissues, it can affect blood vessels, it can affect internal organs, depending on where the penetration has happened. That must have happened to you sometime or the other, where you have tripped, you have fallen, and you have broken your fall. And when I broke my fall, my palm hit that rock. And I don't know if you can see it, but what I have here is an abrasion, also called a contusion. It's a superficial wound. There's no apparent bleeding, because there isn't. It's a superficial wound, and the capillaries under the skin have been affected. There could be swelling, there could be discoloration. The area could be sensitive for some time, and this is an abrasion. When you have an angular injury, an angular lacerated injury, what might happen is the flap of the skin could be seen visible. And when you lift the skin, you could see internal organs, internal tissues. That's an avulsion. All open bleeding wounds are either serious or can become serious very quickly. You have to manage it properly, particularly in the wilderness. You're the only one who can manage it for yourself. You have to clean the place, wash it up, apply antiseptic solution, remove all foreign matter like grass, dirt, other debris which might have gone into that wound. If washing or dabbing with a cotton swab does not remove the foreign matter, you can use tweezers, but you have to get the area clean. In case of excessive bleeding, you need to contain the bleeding. Put a bandage around it, and I suspect if it's a bad wound, particularly a bad laceration or an avulsion, that's the end of your adventure. You need to seek medical advice, get it cleaned, get a tetanus shot maybe, and get a doctor to see it. Because a bad open wound which is bleeding can lead to a lot of nasty things. And remember, it can happen to you. Learn to adapt, improvise, innovate, and overcome. To learn more tips and tricks, visit this site. I'm Chandan Lahiri, and I hope to see you soon at the OTS Survival School. Leave nothing but footprints. Bring back nothing but memories.